Peter, thank you. That's the best and briefest introduction I think I've ever had. Good morning, everyone. HFX Peace with Women Fellowship is an extraordinary program that brings together senior active duty military officers from NATO member and partner countries for a 3-week professional development program in the political, military, and technological centers of North America. It's an annual program now in its 6th year, and it includes more than 40 events where the fellows, and it's hard to refer to them as fellows, but I'll work on that, where the fellows participate in conversation with leaders across the international security sector that shape the future of democracy and global security. And this year, the fellowship began in late October in Washington, D.C., and after stops in my beloved city, Toronto, Colorado Springs, and Ottawa, it's concluding here with the fellows' participation at the annual Halifax International Security Forum. Today, I have the honor of introducing the fellows to the forum. It's a cohort of 11 exceptional military leaders from 9 NATO countries and partner nations, from France, Norway, the United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and of course, Canada. And we're very proud of that Canadian representation. And it's my honor to also now introduce, to say a few words on behalf of the group, Captain Kelly Williamson of the Royal Canadian Navy. Kelly?
Minister Blair, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, today marks the culmination of an incredible 4-week journey, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to be able to introduce you to the 2023 HFX Fellows, a cohort of 11 exceptional women, or 11 exceptional military leaders who just happen to be women. From 9 NATO and partner nations, we represent France, Norway, the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and of course, Canada. We have a combined record of service of over 250 years, spanning more than 30 operational deployments with experience at the tactical, operation, and strategic levels in a multi-domain, joint, coalition, and interagency environments. Our occupations and professional backgrounds vary dramatically, with expertise in intelligence, public affairs, land and maritime logistics, space acquisitions, behavioral psychology, medicine, strategic planning, artillery, naval, and information operations. We operate in all 4 domains across the physical, virtual, and cognitive dimensions. We are war fighters and enablers, each dedicated to upholding the values and principles we collectively hold dear: freedom, democracy, human rights, and individual dignity. We each work in our own way to help preserve the rules-based international order that has been the foundation of our stability, security, and economic prosperity since the end of the Second World War. This fellowship has truly been an incredible, inspiring, and transformative experience. We are encouraged to challenge our own personal beliefs. Some of the key themes we tackled over the course of the fellowship include the evolving notion of national security and how we define and manage regional, national, and global defense. As we did so, we were challenged to answer 3 key questions. Security from what? Security for whom? And security by what means? We quickly came to realize that peace and security are constructs that became ever more enduring when informed by an intersectional perspective. We discussed the foundational elements of democracy: accountability, transparency, and inclusivity, and that the concept of democracy needs to transcend the singular goal of elections and the act of casting a ballot. Leveraging examples from the past, we were challenged to consider what could have been if past interventions had embraced local or indigenous forms of authority and social organization to build and sustain democracy. We discussed ways to collectively manage deterrence and how resilience is fundamental at all levels. Resilience begins at home with each of us. And as we are more frequently challenged across every domain 24/7, we must work together as allies and partners to deter our strategic competitors. Our goal must be to convince them that they cannot win. Our ability to bounce back, to protect the will of our people, to protect critical infrastructure and supply chains is a form of deterrence that will slow them down. Our ability to work together, our ability to collaborate within and across nations is our strategic advantage. We navigated conversations around ethics and the impact of AI and disruptive technologies and the distortion of fact through mis- and disinformation. Seeing in some cases is no longer believing, as these technologies and those who manipulate narratives can have a profound impact on our ability to understand and identify truth. We also discussed the impact of climate change, demographic shifts, and the needs and capacity of the defense industry and the implications that each of these issues has on our national security. Amongst the most challenging themes we grappled with were related to gender, diversity, and the women, peace, and security agenda. Gender and diversity are not problems that need to be solved, but concepts we need to embrace and operationalize within the core of our key institutions. Diverse groups make better decisions, and we're all better when we take into account and ensure we represent the people that will be affected by the decisions we make. Gender and diversity are whole team concepts. It's about reducing our blind spot in our understanding, and there are important opportunities that can be leveraged if we look at the world more consistently through a gendered lens. We know our competitors are taking advantage of seams in our society and exploiting gender roles. We, as a collective, need to do a better job at understanding this and exploring ways we might employ our own gender lens to create strategic dilemmas for our adversaries. Throughout our journey, strategic leadership has featured prominently. Strategic leaders break down silo. They look forward with a vision to the future, and they develop the leaders of tomorrow. Qualities such as authenticity, credibility, empathy, and humility were universally regarded as indispensable traits of effective leaders. Hearing how our own strategic leaders quantify and communicate risk to our political leaders was an important lesson and opportunity that will help each of us refine our own narratives when discussing the requirements of our armed forces moving forward. We were challenged to ask questions, embrace ambiguity, and to foster fearless learning organizations that empower all of our teams. And as we conclude this tremendous experience, we offer our most sincere and heartfelt thanks to Susan Markham and Michaela Tucker, the dynamic team behind this incredible program. We also extend thanks to the program sponsors and to each of our respective ministries of defense for enabling our participation and allowing us to build this outstanding network you see before you and to become members of the HFX community. And to each and every one of the many leaders and experts from across government, the military, academia, and civil society that gave so generously of their time, thank you. Thank you for sharing your diverse and unique perspectives with us and with such candor, and for encouraging our intellectual creativity. We leave this program committed to leading more purposefully and to empowering and elevating those around us. On behalf of the cohort, mesdames et messieurs, merci beaucoup.
And at least
Good morning, Halifax Forum friends. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel, Victory in Ukraine equals Climate Cooperation. I'm your moderator for the panel. My name is Mercedes Stevenson. I am the Ottawa Bureau Chief for Global News. I cover primarily politics and national security for our network. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to discuss this with our panelists today who have such fascinating perspectives that they're able to bring to a very important and complicated topic. I'm going to keep the bios brief because I suspect you know who these people are. They're all very high profile, so we can get to the discussion. But just to remind everyone, we have Jim Landon. He is the president of ATCO Frontenac. We have Mike Savage, who is, of course, the mayor of Halifax. Thank you for having us to your lovely city, Mayor.
Great to have you all.
And we have Madeleine Redfern, who is the COO of Can Arctic Inuit Networks and just a real leader in Canadian society as well. I'll be honest that when I first saw the title of this panel, I had to really think about what it means, because when I'm at the Halifax Forum, I'm thinking a lot about conflict. I'm thinking about peace. I'm thinking about security. I'm not always thinking about climate change. And then I saw Wayne Eyre, our Chief of the Defence Staff, and I thought, if you want to know about climate change, ask General Eyre how the past year has been for the Canadian Armed Forces, how they've had to respond to fires and floods. Ask the Mayor of Halifax what it's been like to be in this province, which has suffered extensively through disaster after disaster. I thought about being in Ukraine and the way that the landscape was changing in front of you every day as a result of the war. And then I thought about the evacuations of the fires and floods that we had seen around the world, of the natural disasters. And in Canada, we're very fortunate that there's a lot of space for people to move, even if it's difficult to move them and we need the military to do it. But in other parts of the world, it's not so simple. And resources and rising water and less land and having to flee these disasters could lead to incredible conflict at a rate that we are not anticipating. And sometimes I think we think maybe we'll get a break. Like you saw in that video, there's a war in Ukraine. Maybe everything else will slow down. But what's happening with our climate is not slowing down. It's accelerating it and it's exacerbating it. And so that's what I'm hoping we can start to talk about today. Madeleine, I'd like to start with you because you reside in the Arctic. You are seeing the profound implications of this every day and the security implications as many countries have an interest in our Arctic and are present there. Do you want to start us off with what your thoughts are on how climate change is affecting international conflict and our security?
So thank you for that introduction and those opening remarks, because that's very much on point. I live in Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, and like Mayor Savage, I actually was a former mayor, and I learned very quickly that I had to deal with a lot more issues than I expected, more than just, keeping the roads clear, some loose dogs, and the problems with the dump going on fire. It actually also meant that I had to deal with the small S security issues, everything from, fact that many of my people are food insecure and live in overcrowded housing, but also everything from the cost of energy, which is 100% diesel. And the fact that many of our communities have power plants that are beyond their age and at risk of actually being lost. And the issue of water security and having, contaminated water, and thankfully the military coming up and supporting us. And so we need to be able to address all these different types of issues, which are, some of it is from the result of climate change. We're seeing the warming of our environment, which means that the permafrost is melting, where our pipes are buried, and it's no longer like, solid concrete, and they break and they burst and they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix, to the invasion of Ukraine, where the fuel prices have gone up and exacerbated the cost of living. So it turns out, as was pointed out, there is such an intersectionality of these issues, and way more complicated and complex than I had realized, and we're having to deal with this in real time. And so I've also learned that industry has an immense role to play in determining or supporting the innovation to be able to address climate change issues and security issues, and that we need to see the investments in the Arctic that are climate change proof, but also good for our economy so that we can be prosperous, but also that is good for defense and security, at the community level, but also at the national level.
Jim, I want to go to you next because of that mention of energy security, which came into such sharp focus for all of us with Ukraine. And it went from just a discussion about the environment and energy to the environment, security, and energy. And I know that that's something you deal with every day in your job.
Yes, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I have to say I'm a poor substitute for my boss, Nancy Southern, who was a previous recipient of the Builder Award here. She unfortunately couldn't make it this weekend, and so I get the chance to try and fill her very elegant shoes. It seems to me that there is a real tension between these competing priorities that Madeleine talked about, where you want energy security, but you also want to tackle climate change. And you want energy security and you want to tackle climate change today, but are these things actually pragmatically and economically possible at the speed at which we'd like to do them? And we've seen, I think, with the Ukraine war, just how important energy is to a country that is trying to fight for its own survival. The Russians have deliberately attacked the electric system within Ukraine repeatedly. And, at the same time, across the world, the various sources of energy and where do you buy your energy from has become an important subject. And the lack of resilience in the system, whether it be for current energy sources, such as LNG or anything else on the fossil side, or whether it be where do you get your lithium from and where do you process it and so on. These are all challenges and they're all coming together, and at the very same time, and the video made it very clear, it doesn't matter what else is going on in the world, climate change is happening and it keeps on happening in the background and it's not slowing down whilst we try to deal with other things. So I think, from the point of view of business, those of us like ATCO who are a utility company to a large extent, we want to make this energy transition. We want to see us doing the right things to fight climate change and to make that energy transition, but it's coming up against some very real barriers of, what can you do in the timescale that we're looking at and that is economically and pragmatically possible. I mean, if I take Alberta as an example, and obviously, as you can tell from my accent, I'm a new Canadian. But if you take Alberta as an example for the Europeans in the audience, you can fit the whole of the United Kingdom inside Alberta and have room to spare, which means that when you're trying to, trying to generate and then move power, around a province of that size, you've got some very real geographical challenges. And then you've got, well, where are you going to get that power from? And then, if some of these things are fossil fuel, and, it's very interesting, in Alberta, only 5 years ago, about 50% of the power generation was from coal. The coal will come to an end at the end of this year, well ahead of the schedule that we had agreed to. But we are still needing gas, LNG, to generate the power for home heating. When you get into -30 temperatures for weeks at a time, renewables are fantastic, but they kind of stop working at that temperature and the wind stops blowing. And so you then have a real problem. So there are some real practical issues with energy transition. I take Alberta as an example because I'm familiar with it, but these problems are the same around the world. So I think we have a real problem to face that requires pragmatic dialogue between government, between business, because it's actually all intertwined. It's about energy that we all need, but it's also about security.
Well, and Mike, on that governance perspective, you have the up-close view of it, and governments are always trying to push forward a narrative to help move things, to invest, but as we're hearing it doesn't happen quickly, and there's a lot of challenges. You've had to find your way through such a difficult year here, and frankly, difficult years in Halifax and the surrounding area, both with security events and with climate change. What's your perspective on this?
Well, again, welcome everybody to Halifax. It's nice to have you here. feel free to extend your stay for a few days and spend some money while you're in Halifax. We have long had that intersection of security and climate, but never to the extent that we have now in Halifax. We had Hurricane Beth in 1971. We had Hurricane Juan, which was game changer for Halifax. That was in 2003. In the last 5 years, we've had 4 hurricanes and 3 tropical storms that have come and battered the eastern, because those storms that used to happen in the Gulf, in Mexico, and up through Florida, used to die out by the time they got to the Carolinas. They don't die out now because the water is warmer. So we've had those increasing number of weather activities in the fall. And then this year, as I mentioned the other night at the dinner, we had the largest, most significant fire in our history in the spring. We had the worst flooding in our history in the summer. We have become a 4-season disaster city. We felt this year like we were living the Old Testament. And people used to see each other in the street and say, when are the locusts coming? When are the locusts coming? It's been a challenge. But I would also, even at that point, I would say, it's not like when you have a drought in sub-Saharan Africa and hundreds of thousands of people are at risk of dying. We have the capacity to deal with it, but we're not going to have it forever if it continues. And on the security side, Halifax has always been an area that's been affected by conflict in other parts of the world. We've been very fortunate in that it really hasn't happened too much on our land, but we see it. In a couple of weeks, we will commemorate the 106th anniversary of the Halifax explosion, when 2 ships collided in Halifax Harbor, 1917, December the 6th. During World War I, they weren't directly involved in the conflict, but they were here because of the conflict. And on that day, 2,000 people died and 10,000 people were injured in a city of 60,000 people. One woman, who I often reference, a woman named Mary Eugenia Hinch Marr Jackson, woke up on the morning of December 6th in Halifax, saw her 10 kids off to school and her husband off to work. And when they found her the next day under the rubble, all 10 of her kids had died. Her husband had died. 3 of her 4 siblings had died, and her mother had died. And when they found her, she was pregnant. And she gave birth to Hubert in April of 1918, and she went on to marry again and have 3 more kids. I mention that because that's the resilience that comes from disasters, but you don't want to test it all the time, right? Halifax is the home of the largest number of military assets in Canada. We have the Air Force 12 Wing. We have the Mighty Maroons 5 Div in the Army. And we have the largest naval base in Canada. And that was reinforced recently, our role. Minister Blair announced the Diana Project, the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. Nobody was more instrumental in that than Andy Fillmore, the Member of Parliament for Halifax, who pushed that, promoted that, and really activated that. So it's a very important part. The AOPS, the Atlantic Offshore Patrol Vehicles that are going to be, that are patrolling the north, were built here at the Irving Shipyard in Halifax. So the security and the changing climate really go hand in hand, and as it does with the energy as well. And I'll just say about climate, it is forcing all of us to change how we look at things. Halifax has a very good climate action plan. It's called Halifact, H-A-L-I-F-A-C-T, which is acting on climate together. And to fund it, we put a 3% tax on properties, over and above property tax, 3%. And I often tell people it was unanimously endorsed by some people. It's a contentious, it is a contentious thing to do. And we need the federal government, we need Minister Blair, and we need the provincial government to support these things. But the world has changed, and I think countries like Canada and many of our allies have been fortunate in that we can sustain the early adjustments to that, the adaptation and the mitigation, but we're going to need a whole lot more in the years to come, and it will affect energy supply, and it will affect the relations that we have. And that opening video, the voiceover with the ice fields and the ice caps, that was kind of it's a shuddering thing, but there is a direct connection between the two.
There absolutely is, and I do want to open it up to the floor too, because I recognize we have an expert audience here, and we would love to hear your thoughts. So just while we're maybe getting the first folks who might like to ask a question, go ahead. And if I could just ask everyone to briefly introduce yourself so we know who you are.
I'm Lobsang Sangye. I'm a regular at Halifax, thanks to Peter and very good staff members and volunteers. I think, we talk about climate change. one particular issue I want to raise is water crisis, shortage of water. Again, the footage that you saw is the melting of glaciers or snow in Arctic. And Arctic and Antarctica is much being covered. But the third largest reserve of ice is in the Himalayas, is in Tibet. And by 2050, the population will be 10 billion in the world, right? And of which 5.3 billion will be in Asia. So more than half the population will be in Asia. Now, Asia is already facing water scarcity. China has a shortage of 40% of the population facing water scarcity. India, and as a whole. Now, Tibetan Plateau, the glaciers, right, is a source of 6 of the largest rivers of Asia and provides water to 1.4 billion people. So it's that important. Now, turning point is 2030. So the more glaciers will melt over Tibetan Plateau and less will be, covered. So that's the major crisis. So you just name it, China occupied Tibet. Primarily, one of the major reasons, there's lots of natural resources where Canadian companies are also investing, okay? Also, river. For example, Yellow River and Yangtze River, cradle of Chinese civilization. Origin is in Tibet. Brahmaputra, Mekong, Salween River, Irrawaddy River for Southeast Asia, and Indus River for Pakistan, and all originated in Tibet. So Asia is going to face major water crisis. Right? Now, in 2050, we will have 10 billion people. Right? Now, presently, we have 8 billion people. Food production is for 10 billion people, which is not enough because a lot is wasted. But in 2050, there will be 10 billion people, of which 50% will live in Asia, of which 60% are going to live in the city areas. Right? Again, they need water. So it's a major, major crisis. So I want, of course, as much as we're in Canada, Canada has surplus of water for 50 years. Okay? Asia is going to face major, major water crisis, and the Tibetan Plateau is very important. I would like you all to comment on that. Thank you.
Madeline.
So I had the pleasure of actually going to an Arctic Circle event organized in Dubai last year and learning about the third pole and finding out that there's actually a lot of similarities in so much as, yes, the poles and the third pole are melting, but at the same time, interestingly enough, we are also dealing with, which is sort of counterintuitive, droughts. So just the same way that you have sort of fires and then the next thing is you have floods, these extremities are extremely difficult to deal with. So Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, is actually, I think, on its 6th year of a water emergency because we don't have enough water for our community. And we actually can't develop because of it. So we need to recognize that we are in such extreme changes and managing it is extremely difficult, which means that we have to plan for it and we have to figure out, almost where we're at and where we're going to be and make the appropriate investments as a result.
I mean, I'd make a brief comment on it, which is not really an answer to your question, but more a sort of expansion of the worry, really, which is that I think water has tended to be seen as a local issue, and it isn't, as you very well described. It's a strategic issue. And what worries me is not only in Tibet and Southeast Asia, as you described, but in Middle East, North Africa as well. I think there is this very great risk that water will be weaponized. And that whoever holds the top of the river will control what goes down the river. And I think we have not perhaps grappled with that or seen it in the significance that it actually has.
Could I just very briefly say, so thank you for the question. Canada has 50 years supply of fresh water. When I became mayor, they told me we had 50 years supply of housing in Halifax, and we don't anymore. So sometimes those things can change. And we do have areas within the Halifax region. So people come here for the security forum, may not realize that Halifax is the largest rural municipality in Atlantic Canada. We're 5,500 square kilometers, we're very large. And we've had areas where we've had droughts as well. What I think about relative to your question is my old buddy Bob Ray, who was in politics and is now Canada's commissioner to the UN, used to say about the economy. He used to say, the animals all get along very well until the water supply starts going down at the water hole. And I think it's the same with water. We can't look at this just as a local situation, but we have to make sure. The old saying of think globally, act locally, we have to make sure that we take a wider view of this across the world, not allow it to become weaponized. Certainly we're fortunate in Canada, but there's no guarantee that will always be the case.
And maybe I could just also add is because I remember with the mayor of Yellowknife and the mayor of Whitehorse, is that their primary energy source is actually dams. And that, of course, is water. And to find out that with a reduction of the precipitation is that they've actually had to build diesel power plant backups. So water is more than just simply the consumption of water, what we need to drink, and of course for agricultural purposes and to cook with. It is also in many places of the world our energy source. And if we're going to achieve some of our energy, I guess, outcomes or targets, water is actually also a critical component of that consideration.
One of the things I love about the Halifax Forum is learning things like that. I mean, it's such an important geography lesson that we don't think about often, and the complications of it, and these themes that are starting to emerge, that thin membrane between the situation we have now, where we have the resources we need, and when it becomes a massive fight for them. The acceleration with which we have to deal with this, but the inability to really know exactly what our bridging is, other than things like diesel and fossil fuels in the meantime. I know we have another question over here, so please go ahead.
Good morning. Maxine Laws, New Zealand. All three of you talked about resilience and infrastructure. Every time you have a fire or a flood, your infrastructure gets damaged in some way. So what are you doing to future-proof the impacts of climate change? And are you using technology and engaging with industry to look at how you can do things differently to ensure not only are you resilient, but your infrastructure survives each fire, each flood? Thank you.
Great question. Mike, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go to that. Look, I could talk about that all day, and I understand we're only going until 4, so I'll have to my answer a little bit. Look, I was at a conference in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago called Climate Proof Canada, and we talked a lot about this. The infrastructure piece is really important because when we lose infrastructure, quite often that infrastructure gave way to climate, so we can't just replace what we already have. We have to make it better. We have to make it stronger. We have to make it more resilient. And I will speak as cities, and I'll be, 2 weeks from today, I'll be in COP in Dubai, meeting with other mayors from around the world. We will be talking about this issue worldwide, which is how do we get the infrastructure right? And we're all burdened with legacy infrastructure that we know is not going to withstand. The stuff we have now is not going to withstand a lot of the climate changes that we have that are coming at us. I mean, Bill toured the areas that we had floods and fires this summer and saw what it was. So this is a major, major cost, and it's not something, in Canada, 60% of infrastructure is managed by cities, and we collect less than 10% of the taxes. It's a tough formula. I say that for you and your colleagues, Bill, because I know you get it. I know you get it, being a former police chief. But so yes, the infrastructure, it's not just building back what we have, and that's why it's both mitigation and adaptation, that we have to make sure. We can't, in Halifax, we don't allow people to build near water because of obvious reasons. We want to maintain nature-based solutions. You know, the average silver maple tree can absorb 200 liters of water an hour. What does that mean? That means it's resilient. So we're putting nature to use, and we think that we can achieve 30% of our climate targets through nature, through trees and the protection of waterways and biodiversity and those things. So the infrastructure is going to change. It has to be better than it was in the past because what's happened in the past is failing us.
I'm going to go to Madeline too and Jim, but would it be possible to give a mic as well to the minister? Because I do want to get his perspective as the former Minister for Emergency Preparedness on that, since we touched on it. Madeline, up in the Arctic, I mean, you were talking about the permafrost giving way, the pipes breaking. You're actively seeing the climate that this infrastructure was built for change. How do you even predict what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years?
So there's a couple of things. One is that I think we have the benefit of seeing what our Arctic neighbors are doing. And truth be told, they're being way more innovative in the development of technologies to address climate change. So, you know, I look to Greenland that actually builds on solid bedrock instead of trying to bury the pipes in what used to be, you know, solid ground and is now constantly in flux. You know, there is a lot of innovation that could and should be done. I remember advocating, unfortunately not successfully, that we should have sensors on our pipes so that we actually know what's happening. All domain awareness to me is, yeah, absolutely. We should know what's happening in an environment, including climatically. In the Arctic, we have virtually very little to no information about the marine environment. This is why I'm advocating very strongly not only to build out a subsea telecommunications cable, but that sections of it should be a smart cable, and that is effectively sensors on that cable so that you're able to get, baseline data on what is the temperature and the pressure and the salinity and the currents, but also being able to distinguish between whales and submarines, or unmanned vehicles in our marine environment, because you can't actually work, without information. So infrastructure, investments and developing technologies for our Arctic environment can be both good for, as I said, the climate, knowing what's happening, because that's anytime there's a military response, one of the things that the people on the ground are trying, okay, well, what weather are we even dealing with? Can we fly in? How much, equipment is required and what type of equipment? Because it is a unique environment. So having that information is absolutely critical as part of the response.
And can I just say on that, the Ocean Frontier Institute here in Halifax is doing a lot of that work and is working in the north as well. So I want to put a plug in. They'll be active at COP again. But those are really, really important points. Like, we don't know enough about what we don't know, particularly when it comes to the oceans.
And to the point about what we don't know, I know particularly in Canada, it's a sovereignty and security issue in the north where there's a lot of interest and not a lot of military capacity to surveil and detect things at the level that I suspect several people in this room would like to be able to. Yes, I promise you I will go back to there afterwards. Minister, I just wanted to give you a chance to jump in because you were the Minister for Emergency Preparedness on dealing with that future-proofing of infrastructure.
A couple of things, if I may. One of the resources that we call upon frequently in Canada, when any community gets in trouble, when people need to be evacuated, when fires have to be fought, when we have to sandbag our communities, we call upon the Canadian military, and frankly, we put a lot of stress on them because they've got a lot of other really important jobs to do, and they've got to be trained and equipped to do it. I think one of the challenges we face, Mike, is I believe there's close to $1 trillion infrastructure deficit in this country. What we've got is aging out. What we've got is not fit for purpose. The new climate reality is going to challenge our communities, and I think in many cases we've built, out of perhaps ignorance or even just ambition, but we've built in places we probably shouldn't have built.
100%.
We put our communities and hard decisions are going to be made. And I think the last thing, and I want to tie climate change back a little bit to the security question. It is on the issue even of water. We are going to see, with increased rising temperatures, drought conditions, we're going to see climate refugees and migrations across this country that can put enormous pressure on our security systems. And quite frankly, we are not yet prepared for it. But there is a growing acknowledgement and knowledge of the challenges we face. And to Mike's last point, all three orders of government and civil society and the private sector all have to step up to the plate on this. There is no one order of government. For a long time, we left it with municipalities, and that was unfair and obviously didn't get the job done. And so I think that's going to require a real commitment, a greater coordination, and a lot of leadership. Thanks.
Great. I know there was a question back there. Yes, go ahead, please.
Good morning. I made my best efforts to be seen, and thank you for giving me the chance. My name is Sabrina Sakeb. I'm an Afghan Canadian. Minister Blair has mentioned something about refugees, and I wanted also to bring this up. Considering the importance of human resources and the challenges of immigration, Canada has hosted 40,000 Afghans who are living here through the evacuation process, which we are really and dearly thankful for that. And I know that hundreds of them are settled down here in Halifax. I wanted to know what is the city's, Halifax city's programs to make sure that these immigrants resettle properly, integrate into the society, and what are your specific programs besides learning English and making a new life here, a qualified and quality life here in Canada, not to be a burden on the shoulders of the societies, rather to be resources, to be helpful. So that's my question to the Honourable Mayor of Halifax. Thank you.
Well, who wants to go first?
I'll go first and say one of those 40,000 is one of my former interpreters from Afghanistan. I'm really glad that Canada got him out before Kabul.
Thank you for that.
There you go.
Thank you very much. You know what? When I became the mayor of Halifax, and it seems like a long time ago now, one of the first things we set up was the local immigration partnership, because I fundamentally believe that the growth of our city is going to be spurred by immigration, and it has been. Last few years, it's also been spurred by interprovincial growth from other parts of the country because of the way that the province and the region managed, COVID. So the first big test for us was what people often don't know, this room would know. Most people don't know that there are refugees all over the world that we don't even see in Canada, because Canada's a hard country to walk to from Africa. You don't just get here easily. And so I'm proud of the fact that we welcome refugees. I tingled with pride when the Prime Minister went out on the tarmac to welcome Syrian refugees to this country. I thought that said a lot about us. In Halifax, we welcomed over 1,200 Syrian refugees in 2016. And we said, what are we going to do? We're not just going to bring them in. I fundamentally believe that in the years to come, those folks are going to be fine. The people who come to Canada, certainly those who come to Nova Scotia, are more entrepreneurial than the people that are born here. They will find their way very well, whether they come with money or whether they just come with a desire for a better life. But what did we do specifically? We were very proud of the fact we had a Welcome to Halifax program where we provided free transit and free recreation services to all refugees for the first 2 years that they were here, which was very helpful to them. And by the way, they're the people who are the most complimentary toward our transit system, and the people who've, so we appreciate that. But the other area that refugees love in this city, and I think in all cities, is the library system. You know, one of the great things about, I'm proud that Halifax, hope some of you have seen our new central, it's not that new anymore, but one of the top 10 new buildings in the world in 2015, according to CNN. Beautiful central library. But you know, the great thing about a library is, you know, that card doesn't cost you anything. And so it is where people gather. We have Dr. Ahmed Hussein over here, who is very involved with people, I'm sure, that are coming from around the world. The library system is a huge welcome to people. So yeah, we've set up a connector program to try to connect new Canadians to Canadians who are already here. And we have to recognize the unique circumstance. I'm an immigrant. I was born in Belfast. I was born in the UK. I came here at 7 years old. I'm an immigrant officially, but I looked like every other kid, except that I was cuter and better spoken. But I looked like every other kid. It's not the same as somebody who came from Syria as one of 9 kids, 3 of whom were in a wheelchair, who have no money, and whose father, who I love, when we asked him his profession to try to get him work, his profession was he was a poet. I said, geez, I don't see a lot of ads for poets right now, but we were able to, but they'll work. So yeah, I think you have to recognize that immigrants build Canada. And immigrants, by the way, are not the reason for our housing crisis. They are a victim of the housing crisis. They may well be the solution to our housing crisis. So we all have to work together. And I think I'm very proud. Halifax has been very good, I think, at welcoming the new Canadians and the special efforts that we've made. Thank you for the question. I'm done. I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yes, we have a question right there, please.
Thank you. Ayman Mhanna from the Samir Kassir Foundation in Lebanon. Going back to climate, my fear is there are a lot of very good principles and objectives, and at the same time, contradictions and difficult policy decisions. Nuclear is one of them, especially in societies that are divided, that do not necessarily have the right levels of good governance and oversight. So, expansion of nuclear, where? The Nile crisis between Egypt and Ethiopia, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people with high risks of migration, of displacement, and we all know the grave yard that the Mediterranean has become between, you know, the southern shore and its northern shore. So will we focus on banning migrants from going to Europe because of crises in Africa? or will we help Ethiopia and Egypt solve their crisis? Dubai, Qatar have all organized COP. Is it greenwashing? Is it real commitment? And should we turn a blind eye on some greenwashing that is happening while also supporting some positive initiatives? These are difficult decisions to make on a daily basis when you're in, your governments. So, is there a way to find a balance between principles and actual good policies? Thank you.
I'd like to put that to you first, Jim, because I mean, that's one of the things you have to think about all the time is dealing with the short term, the energy crisis, the needs, and that long-term transition. And sometimes the workable solution is not necessarily the ideal solution.
I mean, you've made some really good points, both on water and on energy itself. The trouble with energy is that it's such long-term investment required, and for long-term investment, you need certainty, or a degree of certainty at least. And I think, a lot of these things, some energy, as you mentioned, nuclear has had this aura of we can't talk about that and we can't have that here and so on and so forth. But I think we need to have a broader, more open-minded conversation about all energy sources, whether it be the use of carbon capture on some of our existing sources, whether it be more and more renewables, but we need something which provides the base load when the renewables don't work, or you need an awful lot of storage, and then storage takes you into all those supply chain problems and lithium and cobalt and everything else. There are other sources that, and I think there was this question on innovation earlier. There's a lot going on in the world of hydrogen. We in ATCO are doing a lot of experimentation and blending it with natural gas and using it for transportation power and so on, and we're doing it in Australia as well. And that looks very promising, but it's not going to be a whole solution. So we're going to need this blend of different solutions, and I personally feel that nothing should be off the table. Coming back to defense and security, and what Madeleine was talking about earlier, the reality is that in the north of this country, the vast majority of power generation is by diesel, and diesel creates black soot. Black soot goes on the snow, and you get into a nasty circle. And so we've got to get off of it. But equally, when you've got 50% of the year and there's no sunshine, solar's not the answer. If the wind doesn't work because of ice buildup or whatever, that's not the answer. So small modular reactors perhaps have got to be part of the answer. Some of the defense and security issues, we were talking about North Warning System and NORAD modernization yesterday. Some of the requirements of the technologies that are coming in are huge energy use. Well, we can't physically move the amount of diesel you'd need to do that by diesel. So we've got to find another way. I think certainly the conversations I have with people perhaps are becoming more open-minded about nuclear. I hope so. The difficulty with nuclear always is if you put it into an unstable region, people worry about what happens if it gets into the wrong hands and gets used for something else. Not to mention, of course, what do you do with nuclear waste and whose responsibility is it and so on. I think, these are really difficult areas. I think there needs to be ongoing discussion, government to government, but also business to business about what are the practical solutions, what are the policy solutions, and how do you do it. Lastly, your point, and it comes back, a minute ago I was thinking, is immigration really relevant to this, a climate change discussion? But of course it absolutely is in the way you talked about, which is that climate change and the effects of it in Africa, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, is causing people to move. Perhaps I don't believe anyone's ever entirely a refugee or a migrant for one sole reason. There's usually a number of reasons that are all coming together. And so I think, we are seeing mass movement into Europe. There will come a point when it's going to get really difficult for Europe. So your point is valid. Try and fix the problems at source instead.
So maybe I'll add to that. I actually sit on a national advisory council made up of Indigenous peoples on SMRs because we recognize that we need to get approximately 300 rural, remote Indigenous communities in Canada off of diesel. And we're not going to meet our 2050 net zero targets without nuclear. But what I can say is there's a big distinction sort of scientifically and physics regarding SMRs or micro modular reactors compared to the really large concrete water-cooled nuclear power plants. So we are having those conversations now, and I have to thank NRCan for actually supporting those conversations. But we need to be able to provide our communities all the information on all the different energy solutions so that they can have informed conversations and make informed decisions. Because we also know at that Indigenous Advisory Council is that not a single SMR or MMR is going to happen in this country without Indigenous participation. Consultation, looking at our equity involvement, the era of building transmission lines and damming large swaths of our land with no benefits to our people and actually bearing all the risks is no longer acceptable. But what I can say, Jim, is that from what at least I have learned, is that most of the way that the SMRs are being developed, that power source actually cannot be weaponized and is incredibly safe. And so what would happen in the worst case scenarios when it doesn't work anymore is that there is no explosion, there's no meltdown, it just powers down. So, but maybe what I do want to just add is that we are a country that while we have these big laudable targets of net zero by 2050, we have no energy strategy. And I think that's a big problem. Not knowing how we're going to roll it out and meet these targets. So what I can say is that thankfully most of the provincial and some of the territorial sort of power corporations are trying to figure that out, but we do need to do a better job of it because it is often these energy solutions are going to actually be not more than in one province. They're going to actually be networks of solutions, and that means we need to ensure that they're interconnected. And that one solution that works in Alberta may or may not be applicable in Nunavut. We don't know yet, but we need to have those conversations. And they're starting, but I think that we need to accelerate them.
Could I speak to the greenwashing? Because it was a good point that was brought up.
Absolutely.
So I go to COP. I've been to the last two in Glasgow and in Sharm, and this year I'll go on behalf of FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Big City Mayors Caucus. And so we have this discussion because I hear it from lots of people that people are concerned that we're, these rich places. I mean, Sharm el-Sheikh, I don't know how many of you have been there. It's a very, fancy place, Dubai, obviously. And, all these people from developed countries flying in big planes and private planes into Dubai to talk about saving on climate, on greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, it's a challenge. For us, it is an opportunity to meet with other people around the world who share our concern that climate has to be addressed more seriously. The Paris Climate Accords came out of a COP meeting. On balance, there's no question that there is, and the same with there are corporations that are accused of greenwashing what they do, but initiatives that are good are initiatives that are good. So is there some hypocrisy to it? There probably is, but I don't know, if you took all the hypocrisy out of politics, all you'd have is a bunch of loud socks and bad hair. So, we do our best.
No comment as a political reporter on that. Let's take a question from this side of the room, please.
Thank you so much, Solange Marquez from Mexico. Thank you for talking about the greenwashing. My question is about migration. We are seeing big waves of migrants through South America to United States. And it is, of course, a security issue, but it is also motivated because of climate change. And there is no discussion about this in different forums. I have been in different forums, and we are discussing how they are impacting the economy in the United States, the politics, of course, the elections, but we are not discussing what's the cause, and it is mostly motivated because of climate change. We had a Hurricane 5, Category 5 in Mexico last month. It almost destroyed Acapulco. And I think it was 5 years ago, Al Gore was in Mexico, and he talked about that touristic places in Mexico will be in danger. And we have to start preparing for that. We didn't prepare and now we are facing the consequences. So I understand what you say. Yeah, greenwashing is there, and COP28 is not going to fulfill. I think it's failed right now because they are not they don't want to discuss the big issues and put higher standards. So how we face that? How in the South, that we are not included in some of the discussions, how we face that and how we push for something to happen in a fastest mode. So thank you for your answers.
Is that me?
I'm looking at the politician on the panel.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, I mean, certainly your point is well taken. And the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a lot of focus on this just transition and supporting countries that can't afford to do the transition that they need to do. And as I said earlier, as a developed country in Canada, this is a huge hit on our economy. As a city, this is going to cost us 5 to 10% of our budget this year just to retrofit, getting people streets that take them out of communities that, to Bill's point, probably were poorly designed in the first place. But we will sustain that in the short term. And as is the case with every crisis that we have, those who have the least are hit the hardest. It's always that way. And on climate, it's more so than ever. It is those people who have very little resources to deal with the impacts of climate who have to deal with it. So one of the things we can do, there will be climate migrants coming here. And you know, migrancy is based on crisis. In Canada, we opened up for the Syrian crisis, for the Afghan crisis. We have many Ukrainians who are here, perhaps temporarily. And by the way, I haven't mentioned Ukraine very much. Slava Ukraini. I look forward when I leave here. Andy, is that still outside? The protest? I think there was supposed to be a gathering outside in support of Ukraine. But yeah, we have to, as developed, we have to work with people who have less, and we have to forgive debt to countries that we owe money to, so they can afford to then capitalize their efforts on climate. That's just a fact. It's not going to get any easier. It's going to get a lot worse.
Just to pick up your point about resilience and infrastructure and so on, you know, and I think there is no doubt that there have been more hurricanes and more damage, not only in Mexico, but in the Caribbean, in the southern states of the US. And, you know, we as ATCO have been involved in rebuilding the electricity infrastructure in Puerto Rico. And some of what we have been doing there is a Build Back Better system. You know, it is possible when you are replacing infrastructure, whether it's after wildfires, whether it's after hurricanes or whatever it is, to build it back better. And there was a question earlier on about sort of technology and innovation and what we're doing in that space. We are doing an awful lot of work on trying to detect things and prevent them, but, you know, so that, you know, some of the problems that have been caused, I think we had wildfires in California, which, you know, one of the electricity companies came, you know, under fire there for being the cause of the event. So you've got to do better vegetation management, you've got to do better monitoring of it, you've got to build better infrastructure, and I think utility companies around the world are doing better on that. They are learning from each of these events. I think one other point I'd make, though, is to do with resilience and imagination. And we saw events this year, I'm thinking of the wildfires in the Northwest Territories of Canada around Yellowknife and so on, where, you know, sometimes, you know, resilience planning is not carried through to the degree that it needs to be because of a failure of imagination. I think the vast majority of people who lived in Yellowknife, including those in government, couldn't really imagine that they'd ever have to evacuate a city of that size. And so they didn't really do a lot of planning for it. And I think we've got to get better at that. We've got to get to the point where we can imagine what apparently is unimaginable and plan for it, because we owe it to, you know, ourselves to do this and not to be doing things as a last-minute crisis. And as the Minister said earlier, very often it's the Canadian Armed Forces that have to step in to that last-minute crisis. And that is not a good thing for the use of the armed forces, really. They can do it, but it's not what they're designed for. And I think other countries have done some thinking about this, about what you need to stand up in terms of capability and what you can do with the private sector, perhaps, certainly in detection of wildfires and so on, before it gets to a massive size, and deal with things much sooner. And I think we have to start taking those steps. And if we don't do it, we're going to press the button marked Armed Forces Emergency one day, and there's not going to be enough of them there to do it. Or they're going to be busy doing something else that we actually want them to do. So I think we all need to do a better job of resilience. Last point on this, one of the things that my part of ATCO does is we do an awful lot of work with First Nations on resilience capacity building in Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC, and they sometimes get left behind in all of this preparedness training by municipalities, by provinces, and they are the responsibility of the federal government, who don't actually have the ability to do much for them. And we've been doing a lot of work with that, funded by the federal government, and it is making a difference in terms of people being ready to cope when these events come, because we can't stop hurricanes happening. What we can do is be better prepared for them and build back better after them.
We are literally out of time, but I have two very quick thoughts I was hoping you could share before we go, because I think they're important to tie the themes in the panel. Madeline, I wanted to ask you for a quick overview of what the security situation is, particularly with Russia, to tie this back to Ukraine and the Arctic right now. And then, Jim, your view on how that has changed the dynamics with energy demand and what people are willing to accept. I mean, when you have the Green Party of Germany saying fracking is okay, it seems like a pretty drastic paradigm shift. Madeline, if you want to go first.
That's a really big question.
I feel like I left it right to the end.
Well, first of all, I thankfully wrote something that got published, so it gives you a bit of a sense of, why and how Arctic security is at the forefront now of many of our Arctic nations because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the need to not only have NORAD modernized so that we understand, as has been said and articulated, exceptionally well these last couple days, is that we need to invest, and we need to be aware, we need to deter, and we need to ensure that our Arctic peoples and our Indigenous peoples are also part of that endeavor and solution, so that we're not left behind and continue to see, our region not be prosperous. So I think I'm trying to figure out how to succinctly, tie the bow onto that question, which is, we've got to recognize not only as an Arctic nation, but as an ally in NORAD and with NATO, that we need to do a lot more work in understanding the risks and the threats, and begin to prepare and plan and invest in what is required to bring a safe, secure, not only sort of nation, but also our Arctic part of the nation.
Thank you, Madeline. Jim?
All of what Madeline said. I think when I was at Sandhurst, the Berlin Wall fell down, and I thought, oh gosh, what have I done joining the army? I've got nothing to do now. The Russian threat is back in a big way, and we need no more evidence than what we've seen in Ukraine, although there is plenty more. NORAD modernization needs to happen. NORAD modernization needs to go further than we've said right now. A lot of what has been committed to it is good, but it's not enough. The gap between where we need to be and where we are is too big, and the Russians are not going to wait for us to catch up. So I think that is really important. Madeline's point on Indigenous participation is absolutely true. I sit on the board of a joint corporation with Indigenous Inuit Development Corporation partners. They are the majority owners. They operate and maintain the North Warning System. There is the capacity in the North to do these things that is difficult, that is technically advanced. It is absolutely there. And so I think, they need to be very much a part of all of that. And we need to keep finding a way to do all of this whilst taking the challenges of climate change seriously. And, things like that can be done. Small modular reactors, as we talked about, if you put one into the north in order to power some of the NORAD modernization requirements, well, guess what? You could provide free energy to a local community for life. That's pretty convincing, I would say. So I think there is things that need to be done, but the Russian threat is absolutely there, and Ukraine has to win, and that's it.
Yeah, I think you find a lot of agreement in this room, and certainly a need to shore up not only on climate change and our ability to deal with it, but security and energy for Ukraine in the short term, and trying to balance priorities that I think we hadn't thought a lot about balancing before the last couple of years. Thank you so much to our panel and for our room for the great discussion. Please stay in your seats for now. It's applaud, definitely. Peter Van Praag is going to come out and introduce a very special video, the 15 at 15. I think we might have one of our winners in the front row of that. No? It's hopeful. You look so like you would win the 15 at 15.
Steve does it every time with those films. Great one. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge some of our winners. You saw the films from the 15 before we took a break, and some of them are here with us. I would like to have them stand and receive some acknowledgement. We have Koshin from Canada, Michaela from Jamaica, and Sophia from the Republic of Georgia. Great work and inspirational to all of us. Thank you. We all dream of a VE Day, a VJ Day, only for Ukraine. It's been the thread through this entire conference. We're going to try and pull some of those threads together and also answer the questions that some of you may have that have not yet been answered. Let me introduce my wonderful panel here. Andrei Kostin is Ukraine's Prosecutor General. He is next to me. We have General Brieger, Chairman of the European Union Military Committee, and also Irina Filin, who is NATO Secretary General's Special Representative for Women, Peace, and Security. Thank you all for being here. I think that we all understand the basics of what we'd like victory in Ukraine to look like. Restoring the territorial integrity of Ukraine, obviously a cessation of hostilities. But I would like to ask each of you, beyond that, what is your vision for victory in Ukraine? Let me start with you, Andrei.
Thank you. You know, I think the outcome of this conference is our joint vision that Ukraine is the essential battlefield in a global struggle with authoritarian aggression. Russia must be defeated on the battlefield so that single Russian soldier will not remain on Ukrainian land. Russia must be defeated before courts and tribunals through the long arm of justice. And Russia must be defeated by reversing its attempts to destroy Ukraine and its people, which means rebuilding Ukraine stronger than ever while making sure that Russia is the one that pays compensation to all victims and survivors of this war. So, victory, accountability, and reconstruction. These three aspects are interlinked to win in Ukraine and to change what all possible futures with Moscow.
Andrei, thank you very much. General, what is your vision?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this last but very important panel. On a more general view, I see full victory of Ukraine in the access of the European Union membership. Being integrated in the European family and have the chance for its way to a prospering democratic society.
Irina?
When we talk about peace, we don't want a temporary peace, when we want a long-lasting and a sustainable peace. And the only way to achieve this is to include women. Not only in the fight, something that we see it's already happening in Ukraine, but in all the phases of the cycle of a war, and we want to see in peace. And this is happening inside the country, but also outside, in the way in which we, the international community, also deal with the support of Ukraine. It's important to integrate a gender perspective. And I want to mention that this is not only in the armed forces, not on the battlefield, but when we want to support the reconstruction, for example, it is essential that we hear the needs of women and we bring women as part of this process before it's too late.
And of course, the question is, how do we get to peace? You see in the United States an erosion of public support and political support. The latest aid package for Ukraine is held up in the current budgetary situation in the US. And I'm wondering, Andrei, how do you see rebuilding that support? How do we stop the erosion and rebuild public support?
First of all, from the very first day of full-scale invasion, we were open, transparent, and we were vocal. We all remember that this full-scale invasion was named as unjustified. And this is important because it raised again the feeling to restore justice for all Ukrainians. And when war started to show more and more atrocities, not only to Ukrainians, but to all victims and survivors who suffered from this war. And I think that in order to achieve sustainable and long-lasting support, and which is very important, to receive support in time, we need to be united as much as it is possible. Because receiving support not in time or receiving support insufficient cost lives of Ukrainian servicemen and Ukrainian civilians. It makes longer sufferings of those civilians who are under temporary occupation. And I think that if it's our joint vision, it's our joint value that freedom must prevail. We started with this message at the very beginning of this conference. We need all to admit and to say vocally that freedom will prevail. And we don't only need to be assisted or to be helped to win this war. Just win this war with Ukraine, and you will make the global world safer.
General, can you talk for a bit about Europe's role here and whether it can fill the gap if the U.S. indeed pulls back on its support?
Yes, European Union has committed itself in supporting Ukraine to a maximum extent, and I can give you some numbers, but I think more important is that we are clear that this is a war of attrition, and that the sustainment of this support is essential for the success, for the end success of the Ukraine armed forces as a precondition for victory. Amongst the European chiefs of defense, I have the honor to preside. We are completely unique that our first priority is that we give the best advice possible to the politics. How can we facilitate it on a military level? But there are also other components like the industrial base, which has to ramp up its production capacity. There is the public opinion. Vis-à-vis this public opinion, we have to explain why it is worthwhile to give this support, which is costly for the European Union, but for Ukraine it costs lives. And for international community, okay, it's costly, but the alternative is to let an autocratic regime their will, and this is not an option for the free world.
You mentioned industrial production. I know Europe has been trying to ramp up the production of ammunition. Is it doing enough? And I'd love to hear from you after that response, whether, Andre, it's fast enough.
Amongst the military, it's never enough. We had a long period after the end of the Cold War with depletion of our stocks. We reduced the military capacity, and in a logic context, the industrial defense capacity in Europe to a degree where we had just the basics at hand when the war started. And now we have this Zeitenwende notion that it is now immediately necessary to start a production and to initiate new means of, also give incentives for member states to ramp up the production. And we did this via the European Peace Facility, and we did it via the perspective of procuring on a cooperative basis in order to lower the costs and to speed up with the numbers. So this is a lot of measures going on. Coming to the ammunition, we have
initiated a three-track approach. The ambition is to produce 1,155,000 artillery ammunition till spring next year. Probably we will not fully reach this ambition, but we will do our best to further ramp up the production in order to meet the demands and needs of the fighting forces in Ukraine. Coming to the question if United States weaken their support, this is a very political question. I think Europe will remain committed. Ukraine is our immediate neighbor, but we are to some extent optimistic that US society will not let Ukraine down.
Are you getting the ammunition fast enough, first of all?
First of all, I would say that we are optimistic too. And optimism is something which gives us energy from the very first day of full-scale invasion.
Even with a US election pending?
I believe that US will stand with Ukraine long-lasting, even much than we need. And we hope that not only US, but Europe will stay with us until Russia will be defeated. This is important certainty that we need, that Ukrainian people need to hear from politicians in US and in Europe. And I hope that at some stage, politicians will be brave enough to say this vocally to Ukrainians. While you mentioned, General, war of attrition, we haven't heard this last year. It appeared this year. It's because Russia is weaponizing time. We need to use time in our favor. Speed of life in Ukraine is several times faster than here. This is reality. And we need you to take decisions in line with speed of life in Ukraine. In this situation, we will be totally on the same page. We will be totally on the same level, and together we will defeat Russia.
But you're still waiting to hear it. You haven't heard it yet.
That's why I'm here.
Rise to the occasion. I know we have at least some questions in the audience here. Senator Patterson has a couple of questions for Irina in particular, I think. Could we have a mic down here? Right here in the red coat in the second row.
So thank you. I'm Rebecca Patterson, a senator from Ontario. And it really is about the human cost of war in Ukraine. And I'm going to talk about gender perspectives. The one thing we know through open source is about 40,000 Ukrainian women have not just been victimized by the war, but they're standing up to fight. And as you move towards peace, there's going to be a cost of demobilization to all Ukrainians. But I'm going to focus on women and children. And so looking at us as donating nations, I'm going to have two questions. First and foremost comes with what recommendations can we get both from Ukraine on how to better support demobilization, because I am optimistic in victory, but also to focus on the portion of the population that takes a particularly heavy brunt of war. That is my first part. And then my second part goes directly to NATO. I've worked on both sides of NATO. And looking at gender perspectives in policies that politicians are making, I'm finding I'm not quite seeing it yet. Can you give all nations a bit of recommendations on how we can better consider gender perspectives as we look at things like environment and cyber and all the different areas that we are challenged with? Thank you.
Irina, why don't you start?
Thank you very much. We all know that conflict and wars are highly gender. And the war of Russia against Ukraine is certainly one of the most gender we have seen in the past years. You mentioned correctly two dimensions, that it's the high number of women participate in the armed forces right now in Ukraine and the impact on women and children. Those are the two pillars of the agenda of women, peace and security based on Resolution 1325. the participation of women as an agent of change in a war, and the need to protect the most vulnerable because of the impact and the differentiated impact that war has. We at NATO, we are working closely with the armed forces and with Ukraine. I engage at different levels to better understand how we can support women in this moment, but also once peace will come. We have conducted a gender assessment needs in collaboration with the Ukrainian authorities to listen from women there and listen from the institution to understand what the different needs are, because this is still the problem. When we provide our support, we also, as NATO, providing non-lethal support, we are still gender blind despite the policies and the action plan. It's so difficult to move from these policies into action. When we provide medical kits or medicine, we don't think that on the other side, this might be a man or a woman. We provide a gender blind kit. And this is where we have really to come and make this change, is to really sit and think, fine, and this is the question about the policy and what we can collectively do. We have really to sit and ask ourselves, to whom I'm sending this kit? What will this action, what is the impact, what is the final recipient? We are not all equal, and if we only for physical reason, biological reason, we have different needs. And this is very basic, but it comes from, as I mentioned, the medical, but it comes from the equipment. We are still about having the conversation about the lack of bulletproof vests for women in the armed force. Now this is changing. The first production is in place. But then for me, it was impossible to think that it's not given for granted, and that's not the case, and not only in Ukraine. And this is where I want to stress. This is a common problem across allies. Women do not have the right uniform, and they don't are protected in the same way. The proof vests are very heavy, so if we as a woman carry the one that are done for men, we will have spine injuries. If they are not in the right way to light, we are not protected enough. So this requires investment because that's a very costly product. But if we want to have women and to defend our country, we need to be able to defend themselves, women themselves. So that's something that it's very important, and the gap is between the policy and the implementation, but it's a cultural gap. The problem is the challenge, the change of the mindset that we all have to still do collectively.
Andre, do you want to weigh in?
You know, thank you for the changing of the mindset, because we have also changed a lot of elements of our mindsets, and we not only change approaches, but we also develop new strategies, and I would say new approaches how to ensure that all victims and survivors suffer from this war will be properly cared by the government at large. I think it really changed approach of all law enforcement system. We started to change this approach to victim-centered, to the most vulnerable victims of this war, to the victims of conflict-related sexual violence crimes. I created special unit in my office last September. We changed approach to victim-centered to avoid re-traumatization, to give full respect to victims and survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, of which women and children are most likely the victims. And we saw that this gave us proper result. We introduced even the principles of so-called Murad Code in the strategic documents of my office. So they are used now by all prosecutors and investigators. And then we saw that we start to receive more reports. We start to receive more information from victims and survivors. This is very important. And when I understand this, I start to understand that we need to extend such approach to all victims of this war. That's why I created the coordination center to work with victims and survivors, where specially trained professionals will deal with them, to help them to navigate in this very difficult world. But once again, we are looking even wider, because it's not enough only to ensure or to offer elements of justice to victims of the war. It's important to ensure that they are properly cared in all other dimensions medical, psychological, financial, even relocation of these people to the safer places. And with this, we coordinate these efforts with the other governmental institutions. And this is a state policy. And also, I want to mention, we all understand that every person in Ukraine is suffering. And as long as war is ongoing, the suffering become more. And it's important for us to ensure that mental resilience and mental recovery of our people will be also ensured. And for that, we need substantial support from the global community. We need healthy people to live in peaceful Ukraine. And this support is very essential.
I do want to ask you about the mindset of the Ukrainian people. They've got to be exhausted. Are they still in the fight 100%?
You know, I've been asked one time if Ukrainians are still hope in victory. And I said that every morning when we stand up after difficult nights in some regions, after difficult news we receive, depending on many other aspects, we live every day between hope and belief. Because when we are stronger, we believe in our victory. We believe that we will be supported. If situation is a little bit more difficult, we hope. But every one of us believe in our victory. And the mindset of Ukrainian people is to defeat Russia. You know, last year, when Russia started to destroy our critical civil infrastructure, we thought that it will really cause the the transfer of Ukrainians to Europe. But we haven't faced big numbers. Ukrainians were so angry about such policy, such terrorist policy of Russia, that they resisted during this very difficult time. Of course, your support, humanitarian support, generators, anything we receive helped us to pass through. And approaching this new winter season, I see that Ukrainians are ready to resist and to fight. And this is important if they will receive the same signal, very bold signal from all of you, from all of our allies, that you are fighting with us, helping us to fight, providing us with all necessary means, not only to resist, but to achieve our victory. And these bold signals from politicians, from all our allies and partners and friends are very important. Please tell your politicians to be vocal and not only say that you stand with us, but that you will stand with us until Russia will defeat it. And you will help us in any means to reach this victory.
So we've been discussing Ukraine for a couple of days, but I suspect that there are some big questions that some of you have that have not yet been answered. And this is your opportunity. I see someone behind the cameras here in the center of the back. Can we get a microphone to him? Please identify yourself. And for all of you, if you could keep your questions relatively crisp, we'd appreciate, because we'll get to more of them.
I will try my best. My name is Matthias Gebauer, working for German magazine Der Spiegel. Mr. Kostin, a question not completely regarding our topic here today, but it's a big topic in Germany regarding the investigation who was behind the attacks on the Nord Stream 2 pipelines. There were reports 2 weeks ago, I'm sure you are aware of it, that Ukrainian but also Western intelligence services have the suspicion that a former commander of the Ukrainian special forces had a role in this, or at least Ukrainians gave this name to Western intelligence services. Could you tell us a little bit, are your services investigating if this Ukrainian commander had a role in this, and what are the details of this investigation? Thank you.
First of all, I would say I would ask maybe you to give more information, because we have only received information from media, and it's not enough to understand more. So I think that if we will receive any request and any information by official sources, of course, we will prepare our answer and we will comment on this. Because just information in media is not enough in our situation of gross propaganda and gross misinformation that could appear in any source. So, to be clear enough, if we will receive any request, we will start our action.
The question was whether you were conducting an investigation.
This was my answer. So we have no official information about anything.
But are you investigating to try and get that information?
If we will receive requests from the authorities of like Germany or from any other, we will respond in proper manner.
Do we have here's another question right here. Microphone.
Thank you. Ayman Mhanna from Samir Kassir Foundation, Lebanon. My question to NATO and the EU, and not that anyone would regret the Putin regime. Can the Putin regime survive a defeat in Ukraine? And are there any planning for the day after in Russia?
General, you want to take that jump ball?
Well, it's hard for a militarian to comment on the chance of an authoritarian regime to survive. I consume the open resources, and my impression is that despite this Wagner incident last summer, the regime is stable. I think we all are unique that we wish a regime change in order to give Russian public, Russian society the chance for their way in a democratic future. And I think we should, on the political level, but also in the public, we should precisely distinct between Putin and his immediate leadership and Russian society, which is suppressed very intensively by the regime. All the opponents are either dead or in jail, so it's not easy to be opposition in Russia.
And in the meantime, he's increasing his military budget and spending even more to prosecute the war in Ukraine, correct?
Right. Yes, Russia has an enormous potential to ramp up production capacity, and they proved it during World War II. This is a big economy, probably not the high-end products, but vast numbers of material and big numbers of human resources, not well-trained, not very motivated, but still a factor on the battlefield.
Did you want to weigh in from the NATO perspective at all, Alina?
It's difficult to look at the future and to see. So what we do is to work on the current scenarios and all the possible, or even in the case that, the regime will remain after the victory of Ukraine, to see how to keep our relationship or lack of relationship with Russia. So I think that we have to keep all the possibilities open to be realistic.
We do have a question down here in the front. Microphone right here.
General, in your first answer at this panel, you said that you would like to see Ukraine integrated in European Union. You omitted NATO. And I want to make sure that, we have a clarity of perception. Because the way I see it, NATO was built in 1949 with one purpose only, to save Europe from Russian aggression. Okay, at that time it was River Rhine, a potential battlefield. Now it's River Dnieper. But it hasn't changed in purpose. And Ukraine is fighting the only war NATO was built for. So I want to hear whether, Ukraine's admission to NATO is still in the agenda, because I believe it belongs to NATO, de facto. And also, it's about perception. German Minister of Defense, Mr. Pistorius, once in his interview said that Europe had to be prepared for war in 2025, war in Europe. The last time I checked my map, Ukraine is Europe. So does it mean that, you still have this kind of separation between Ukraine, which is seen as part of the East, and Europe? And at what point we can see this unity in purpose? Thank you.
As an European official, I have to say it's an autonomous decision of NATO whether to invite Ukraine to join the alliance. From a geostrategic perspective, both organizations, NATO more militarily, but EU also, when it comes to security and resilience, are in charge of security, of European security. I would pass the question maybe to our charming NATO colleague. From the European perspective, we are looking forward to access to European Union, which also is developing a military dimension, but not overlapping with NATO. We are more looking for crisis management outside Europe. So you rightly stated that Ukraine access to the alliance would be perhaps a logic step, but it's upon the politicians and the society to facilitate such a step.
I think allies have said this very clearly. The right place for Ukraine is in NATO. That has been stated and reiterated in several occasions. And the Secretary General says quite often the title of this panel, "We will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes." And I would like to add until the victory, as it was pointed out correctly, that the sentence maybe can be complemented with this part. I think we have never been so close with Ukraine. And I was telling, before we came in, something that we are seeing and experiencing every day. In our relationship with partners, we conducted training to enhance the interoperability. And we have reached a point where it's not only NATO giving training and Ukrainian learning from NATO, but we have reached a point where it's a mutual exchange. We, as allies and as a NATO, are learning from the experiences and the skills and competencies developed by our Ukrainian partners. And what he was referring to when it comes also to accountability and justice, I want to underline what the Ukrainians are doing. It is the first time that during a war, prosecutors there are prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence. This has normally happened, if you look at the Balkans, after the war has ended, maybe after decades, and there are still in the Balkans the process ongoing. This is unique, and this is it will be a lessons learned and a case studies for all of us. So there is no question that an invitation will be addressed. It is then up to allies to decide when and when the conditions will be met.
Sooner is better, from your perspective, I presume.
I think as soon as possible, and sooner is better. Of course, it will be better for Ukraine and will be better to preserve peace in Europe. And thank you for mentioning our really unique experience in not only documenting war crimes, but investigating and prosecuting them in course of ongoing war. And I will also say that from the point of view of delivering justice, we really receive huge support. And it's not only support to our investigation and prosecution, but we are investigating now more than 110,000 incidents of war crimes of all of the ranges. It's our primary commitment to deliver justice to all Ukrainians. And we understand that 99+% of all war crimes will be investigated and prosecuted by ourselves. But we are supported with this by many institutions who really help train our prosecutors, share experience. And on our side, we create absolutely new techniques and new approaches, which we are ready to share worldwide. We have a unique cooperation with the, I would say, partnership, as Karim Khan usually mentioned this, with the International Criminal Court. and first arrest warrant to Putin and Lvova Belova, it was a result of our joint operation or joint action, which lasted only 5 months. And this is also a unique feature of this arrest warrant. Never before ICC reacted efficiently in such a speedy manner. And moreover, our partnership with the ICC is also a unique feature because the International Criminal Court, by its nature, is a complementary mechanism. So it's intervene when national authorities are unwilling or unable to prosecute by themselves. We are willing and we are able, but we have no jurisdiction, for instance, against or over acting president, because they have personal immunity in any national system. And first arrest warrant was against Putin because we cannot touch him directly in our national system. That's why the accountability for the crime of aggression is critically important, and we are the first from the Second World War to create coalition of countries who are ready to establish special tribunal to prosecute for the crime of aggression Putin and the other members of the highest military and political leadership, first after Second World War. We need to fill in this gap in accountability because aggression, crime of aggression, is a leadership crime. Crime of aggression caused all other 110,000 incidents of war crimes, killed people, wounded, raped, tortured. We need to put an end to this practice. And accountability, once again, is deterrence. We need to show to the other potential aggressors that we, as civilized world, are together in order to prosecute those who will try to commit aggressive acts.
We have a couple of questions, I think, back here. There are two of you side by side. If we could pass the mic over, perhaps you could both ask your questions and then we'll get them to the panelists.
Thank you very much. I'm Emma Belcher, President of Ploughshares Fund, which is a nuclear threat reduction foundation. I've got a question for the Prosecutor General. One of the reasons that the US and NATO have said that they haven't maybe earlier on moved faster or provided the kind of support the Ukraine's asked for is concern about escalation to potential nuclear use and potentially nuclear war. Putin hasn't made explicit threats as recently, and I'm wondering, do you think this is the real reason that the US and NATO haven't done more? Is there anything else going on here? And that's the first part. And then the second question is, how do people in Ukraine feel about Putin's nuclear threats? Do they take it seriously? Are there a range of views? Are people concerned?
Okay, why don't you pass the mic? There we go.
Thank you. I think mine might not be a question, but I make it very quick. I would like to draw the attention that Afghanistan once in the previous century has defeated Soviet Union. Please look through the history and see what works then and there and why we defeated Soviet Union in Afghanistan. There are some similarities. And second of all, in this century, US, NATO, and all their allies have been defeated in Afghanistan by the Taliban, and they left everybody behind, including the women who paid a lot of, they put their life in line. So while I wish victory for the Ukrainians, that's what I wish for my country as well. But I hope that you will be prepared and not 100% rely on the allies, because there will be a day that they will leave your country. And make sure on that day you're prepared to manage and not to experience what we have gone through as a nation. Thank you.
Okay. For you, the question on nuclear.
I think we all understand that Russia is using of course, people are discussing these issues, but I don't think that Ukrainians are afraid of it. We understand that this is blackmailing. We're not running out of our country. Even we saw such information, such potential threats, such discussion, such news during these 20 months many times. It means that we are not afraid. And we ask all of you not to be afraid of Russian nuclear blackmail. This will make us stronger, because if they feel that the others are afraid, this will lead to a situation that they will be over you. They will threaten you and you will try to compromise them. Are you ready to compromise killers, rapers? Think about it.
General, are you as confident that it is just rhetoric from the Russians when it comes to nuclear weapons?
We share this assessment that this is some sort of information operation that we show we have the power that as a weapon of last resort we can use, let's say, tactical nuclear weapons. We deem it not very likely, so I would basically go with the Prosecutor General.
I also want to follow up on the question about Afghanistan and the statement that be prepared, the Allies are going to leave. Is that going to happen in Ukraine?
In my perspective, not. There are maybe some similarities, but the start of the intervention in Afghanistan was a complete different situation. It came from 9/11 and the search for Osama bin Laden. Then it evolved to be a long-lasting conflict with all this tribal situation in Afghanistan. So I personally would go with the lady that we all wish a better situation and a democratic development for your country. In Ukraine, there is a democratic regime. There is a sovereign nation defending their freedom, and I'm really in line with those who say the West stand with Ukraine in order to give all the preconditions to have the success. When it takes one more longer, then we have to be patient, but we have to be strong.
And what about, Irina, the comment about women, how women fared in Afghanistan, how they may fare in Ukraine?
I agree that it's a different situation to compare, but just let me tell you something. I hear you, and I hear the voices of Afghan women. And it's difficult from my perspective, having an official role, to say more than that. NATO operates under a mandate, NATO withdrew from Afghanistan, and I know that it's very challenging and difficult for you to hear that, and believe me, it's difficult for me to tell this. But as a NATO official, this is the situation, but I think there are different ways for women to come together and try to continue the fight on that. But I agree that this is different. This is not living in the same way, because we are not, for NATO, we are not present on the territory. So we were there with some missions, which is not the case here. We operate in a partnership agreement, and we are continuing the relationship we had before in different ways. So on that perspective, it is different. Then I understand you can live even without being present with your boots on the ground. That's I understand.
We have another couple of questions down here in the front. Where's the microphone? We have the former president of Estonia with his hand up in the front row. And then I would like you to pass it back. But there's the mic. There's a gentleman right behind you who will want the mic next.
Quickly, I want to answer that question from a different perspective about nukes.
On the first day, there was a video here which had me from when I was here in 2014 pointing out that the NPT regime is dead after the way that Ukraine was abandoned as a result of the Budapest Agreement. The West did not live up to a Budapest Agreement. Ukraine not only gave up its nukes, it also gave its long-distance bombers, and it also gave up its missiles, which are now both being used against Ukraine. Now, when you say, is there an effect? Maybe not in Ukraine, but the year of self-deterrence on the part of the United States and of NATO, saying, oh my God, we can't give them ATACMS, we can't give them this, we can't give them that. When you do give them ATACMS, you only give them the short-range ATACMS with cluster munitions, not the ones with the heavy load of TNT, which would take out the Kerch bridge. Yes, so in fact, nuclear threats have not worked on Ukraine. It has made the West wimpy. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much indeed. My name is Roderich Kiesewetter from the German Parliament. My question is to the General Prosecutor. The question of the German journalist about the pipeline infrastructure shows how effective Russian false flag operations are, and it is very much linked to the question of trust to Ukraine. How effective are these Russian operations regarding the involvement of Ukrainian oligarchs who are against the current government, the democratic government of Ukraine? Is Russia abusing it, and could you prosecute that? And to General Brieger, how unanimous is the European Union when you see the role of the Slovak Republic and Hungary? Thank you.
Well, we have a couple of different questions there. I suspect you may want to respond to the President on the question of nuclear vulnerabilities.
I mean, maybe the last question.
As well. Go for it.
I think that we all understand in Ukraine that oligarchs was the real problem of our society because of their illegal influence in many spheres. And they created the system for decades. And we, at time of war, first time in our history, started this fight against their illegal activity. Some of our oligarchs are indicted. Some of them are in Europe, and we are fighting to extradite them. One person who is treated as an oligarch by people, he is now in detention for economic charges, for money laundering. And this is our fight to make our country better, to clean it from corruption, to clean it from illegal activity of oligarchs, to clean it from organized crime. These three pillars in which we concentrate our efforts in parallel to all other work we are doing in time of war. Once again, they require substantial support from the European community. I will not mention countries who are very resistant to extradite top-level corruptioners to Ukraine. I will not name them now. But I want this to be happen because Ukrainians want justice, not only from Russia for the crimes committed by Russia against Ukraine and Ukrainians. You can't divide your demand for justice in your head. You demand justice for the war crimes from Russia, but you don't want to demand justice for something with which you are not okay in Ukraine. It's existential demand for justice. And we try to deliver this justice in time of war. And this fight, we started it, it will take time. And we need to be backed and supported in every level to clean our country from oligarchs. But for them not to appear in Europe and spoil in Western Europe, I would say, and to spoil your countries with their influence. So we need this support, and I hope it will be enhanced.
Mm-hmm. General, has the West gone wimpy?
The decision to support Ukraine from the very beginning was taken anonymously, as you know. So including the member states you named. And I think this sort of discussion underlines the necessity of an enhanced strategic communication, again, to explain our societies that European Union was established as a project of freedom and prosperity. Freedom and prosperity has to be defended against external threats, and security is not for free. So we should intensify this sort of communication on the political level, on the media level, because we live in a world where via social media you can pass any information. Nobody will prevent you from doing so and stating there has been an explosion, something threatening the energy supply, and so on and so forth. So I'm not a politician, but what I expect from European member states from a military perspective, that the obligations we gave and we committed to are valid for the future and are well preserved in order to reach our common goal, the success of Ukraine in this war.
I know we have some other questions. Here's a hand up back here. Where is the microphone?
Thank you. My name is Vincent Chow. I work as a foreign policy advisor to the governing DPP in Taiwan. My question is for General Berger, and two questions, well, and very fast. First one is that we've been exploring basically over the past year, but particularly over the past 3 days, the juxtaposition between victory in Ukraine and peace and security in the Pacific region. Do you personally view success in Ukraine, for Ukraine, as correlated to peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region and Taiwan Strait in particular, first? Second is that how do you respond to critics from the United States that say that the U.S. is stretched thin, that its focus on Indo-Pacific has made it difficult to continue to focus in Europe? And is the European Union prepared to do much, much more in Ukraine, particularly given domestic considerations in the United States? Thank you.
To my opinion, winning the war in Ukraine and all these strategic aspects are interconnected internationally. So you cannot divide between security in Europe from influences to Indo-Pacific. This is all interconnected. So I deem success in Europe in defending the freedom of a sovereign country is also a contribution to peace in your region. And the fact you mentioned in the second part of your question that the US is more reorienting its geostrategic interest to the Indo-Pacific. This has not started with the Ukraine war. This is a long-lasting process following US global interests. On the other hand, United States are intensively supporting Ukraine in its war against this unprecedented aggression. So to balance all these aspects, these are the critical questions our politicians have to solve and have to find the right priorities. And I'm convinced they are trying to do this in a proper way for the sake of the security of the world.
So Taiwan is obviously not the only distraction. The Israel-Hamas conflict is taking a lot of energy and has knocked Ukraine off of the front pages in much of the world. Do you feel that acutely? Do you think it's impacting support for Ukraine?
Once again, it's about time. Because to ensure our victory over the Russia sooner than later could prevent many other conflicts which start to appear. So I totally agree with General, these issues are interlinked. And if at the moment only Ukraine is fighting on the battlefield with Russia, we need to ensure that our victory will be the fact sooner than later, and to ensure that those who commit this aggression would be accountable. These are two elements which could prevent new wars and conflicts. And if we lose time waiting for support, then you will see new conflicts in the other parts of the world. We understand this.
When it comes to financial support, in the United States Congress, at least, there is more full-throated support for aid to Israel than there is to Ukraine right now, however.
We understand how much we need to run the country in addition to military support. Our partners in US, our partners in Brussels understand this either. So I hope that the civilized world will have enough resources to help us to win our war started by Russia. But once again, it's important to take decisions now, because if you will take them later, and if more wars and conflicts will be started, you will pay more. We will all pay more. It's better to pay now less than later pay more.
We are almost out of time here, and I did promise you the last word. You're our Ukrainian representative on this panel. That is what this entire conference has been focused on. Inspire us, motivate us, propel us out of this room with purpose.
I think that I will say something which I have already said during this panel, and thank you for all of you for your words and acts of support. First of all, politicians in time of war should be brave. And to be brave means not only to say brave words, it means to take brave actions. If politicians will take brave actions, then we will all win. When we hear "be brave like Ukrainians," let's include in this, take brave decisions. And military, lawyers will follow such instructions from the politicians. We are all interconnected. We are all one family. We need to protect each other, and we need to win for the sake of us, our children, our grandchildren, and as a tribute to all those who passed, who were killed in all previous wars and conflicts, we need to ensure justice for the victims and survivors of this war. We need to establish, to fill in the gaps in international law and order in order to preserve long-lasting peace in Ukraine, in Europe, and beyond. We all need this. You all need this. Let's come back to your politicians and make them take brave decisions. Act for Ukraine. Help us as much as we need, and you will see results. Result will be our joint victory. Thank you.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you to our wonderful panel. And now I know Peter has a few closing words for us.
Every Ukrainian is a hero. And I thank you all for saving all of us. Thank you. I want to thank a few people, my board of directors, my team, Madam President, my team, and I want to thank all of you who've traveled here, who've spoken, and who've really given us a sense of moral clarity going forward. I also want to thank my filmmaker, Steve Markle, who set the tone through us the entire weekend. This weekend was an important dose of moral clarity, and I urge all of you to carry it with you and keep it with you when you do your important work back home. We'll see you back here next November. Safe home. Thank you.